time. Day converted man here. Okay. S.J. Thompson. I know. I'm sorry. I am sorry, but just sometimes, you don't have a choice. As a video, the Old Testament prophecies that frighten atheists. Once again, a straw man construct known in the Old Testament. Anything frightens, I dare say, any atheist at all, ever. I don't think that there's a single thing in the Old Testament that would frighten an atheist. But there might be an atheist out there that is sort of frightened, I suppose. I doubt it. Yeah. But anyways, so Old Testament so-called prophecies. Well, mentioning Isaiah, Judaism 101, Jewfact.org. If you look up Jesus, they don't, where are you looking for Jesus? You won't find him here. Jews don't believe in Jesus. There you go. Well, why not? Because he's not the Messiah. Why? Because he didn't fulfill the prophecies. I trust the Jews on that more than I would the Christians. Because, of course, to the Christian, well, he did. But he didn't, according to the Jews. Otherwise, all Jews would be Jesus followers. It just kind of follows. MyJewishLearning.com has more about that. And if you look up other Jewish websites and sources, you will not find anything except for the Jews for Jesus that is pro-Jesus. And they're not considered really part of the Jewish thing to many. So, it's like, okay, yeah, they're Jewish, but, they've kind of had to adopt Jesus because, reasons. The apologetics is just wanting there. So here's one of many problems. Whoever wrote the things about Jesus had access to the Torah. If not physically, then they had access to the stories of the Torah. So it's not impossible that they could have just said, yeah, there's a prophecy there. I need to make Jesus fit that. So, okay, Jesus did this thing, even though Jesus didn't do that thing. And that seems to fulfill that prophecy. Many times in the New Testament, you see, and then Jesus did this, and that fulfills this prophecy. Like, why would you write it like that? Why? It's like, oh, wow, Jesus did this thing. It happens to fit this prophecy. Why wouldn't you just record it and let people figure out that it fulfilled the prophecy? Why would you need to reference back to that unless you were worried that people wouldn't get it or something? So it doesn't read like history. It reads like a narrative, like a third party that's omniscient, knows what's going on, knows what needs to happen, knows that Jesus needs to do certain things, and then says, yeah, Jesus did that, and that fulfills that, and Jesus did that, and it fulfills that. And it has Jesus doing things that just don't make sense in order to fill many of the so-called prophecies. And at least one, if not more, of the so-called prophecies in the Old Testament have been altered in the Christian Bible to fit the Jesus narrative. If you read the Torah and you read the Old Testament, there's some major differences there. Or, well, you might say minor differences, but the minor differences become major because, well, it doesn't quite align perfectly. But the Jewish people would have recognized the Messiah, and Jesus wasn't recognized by the early Jews or the later Jews or the Jews that came after that. It wasn't until far later that you get the Jews for Jesus. And a few Jews might have, sure. But to recognize him as a Messiah, he didn't do what the Messiah said that he would do. So he's not. So those are the problems. Is you have something written after the fact that, of course, if you have access to the old writings, you can just make up what the person did to fit the prophecies. That's easy. And say, oh, yeah, Jesus did that. Now, even if Jesus existed, doesn't matter. If you're making up a story, like, yeah, Jesus did this at this place and that fulfilled that prophecy. What's to stop you from doing that? Nothing. And especially if you want to bolster up how Jesus is the fulfillment of these prophecies. If you want to promote your religion, there's nothing holding you back from just making up stuff and throwing it in there. Maybe you heard it from somebody that heard it from someone else. And so it's not that you're lying, it's just that you're reporting on what you heard, because hearsay is a big thing back then. Nobody's going to double check these things. This isn't actually difficultly, critically studied, historically documented things by lots of people. It's like, I don't know how many people are involved in writing the New Testament. There's many hypotheses of who wrote what and when, and that's another problem, is we don't even really know who these people were. But it doesn't seem to me like they were really questioning things like, oh yeah, there's 500 people that saw Jesus come back. Really? Can we get some names maybe, or where they were? Like, they lived over here or over there and their name is this and that. No, just you're gonna throw that number out there. Okay. It's just too contrived. The other problem, of course, with prophecy is the one making it at the time. How do we know that it's going to be fulfilled? Like, how do we know that that's a prophecy? Unless they say, and the next thing I'm saying is going to be a prophecy, blah, blah, blah. What's the criteria for determining when a statement is going to be prophecy and when it's just something that somebody said? If you write down enough stuff that someone says, you're going to get a hit eventually. Of course, prophecy can be fulfilled by somebody that wants to fulfill it, self-fulfilling prophecy. Now, Israel will one day become great again. Well, wonderful. Eventually that will happen, and even if it doesn't, you can just say, well, one day it will. So you can just put it off. Of course, this also ignores plenty of prophecies in both the Old and New Testament that have been falsified. One comes to mind about I want to say the one in Saddam Hussein had this location that he controlled, and supposedly that city was never going to be rebuilt. Nobody was ever going to dwell there, and he started to build a thing. But then his regime was stopped before he could do it. But people were living in or around that area in tents or something so they could build the dang city. So what counts as dwelling in that area? See, it's vague. The prophecy is vague. It's like, if I set up a tent in that area and I sleep for that night, am I dwelling there? What is dwelling? What does that mean? So to try to falsify these prophecies is impossible because they're so vaguely worded. He was like, okay, I'm going to build a house right there. I'm going to live until I die. It's like, well, but you didn't have kids, so that's not dwelling. Okay, we'll have kids. There'll be several generations. Well, that's not dwelling because it's not enough people, right? You could always move the goalpost back. Of course, nobody's going to go there because the area that it's in is very dangerous right now. But at some point, it could be rebuilt, and then you could just say, well, it wasn't really rebuilt. The city wasn't rebuilt. See, so yeah, they're dwelling in that area, but the city would never be rebuilt. And even if you built the city exactly, you could always just say, well, it doesn't really count because of whatever. So these are, if not vague or ambiguous prophecy, they're, potentially you could self-fulfill them. Of course, you could just write them and pretend that they actually were fulfilled without any evidence that they were fulfilled at all. Just say that they were. You could go back and rewrite the old stuff to match the new stuff. You could do all sorts of things. And who's to stop you? Because you're the only one. If you're the only one able to write and read, because literacy is illiteracy rather is widespread, then literally there's no one to really say no to that, and to maintain the power base of those in charge. Of course, you're going to have a limited amount of people able to write stuff down or uh, make things into accepted canon. And in fact, well, how did the people come up with the canon of the Bible in the first place? They had a bunch of people sit around somewhere praying for what was good and what wasn't. Yeah, because that's a good way to decide stuff. And then, of course, you had the common practice of let's burn the old uh, scroll after we copy it, which is just fantastic because then that doesn't leave us older stuff to find. But yeah, the Dead Sea Scrolls. Oh well, but they were found later, and they have these things that align. Yeah, but again, some stuff doesn't align, and if you know about those stories, you can just make up the story to fit. So it's just not impressive at all. It is nothing more than circular reasoning. The New Testament proves the Old Testament. No, it doesn't. There's nothing to confirm that anything that happened in the New Testament happened. So none of it scares me. And it's too vague, anyways. Now, if there was something like, this person named Donald Trump will become president at X date or whatever, that would be impressive. But of course, somebody could just decide to make that happen. Also, doesn't prophecy kind of negate the idea of free will? Just to toss in another problem, because God's having to orchestrate events in such a way that things will happen in a certain way, and at some point that's going to negate somebody's free will. But that's okay because God hardened Pharaoh's heart, so obviously God's okay with negating free will, unless, of course, God's not okay with negating free will, which is why it hides so well that we can't see God, even though God is clearly manifest as well. That's why he needs apologetics to argue for his existence and a Bible, because he's so well known. God revealed itself to a local tribe of people at a certain time in history, such in a way that it would look identical to every other religion of that time, in that era, and in that location from the outsider looking in. And what about the rest of the world that existed during the time that God was supposedly revealing itself to the Jews and then later the Christians? I guess they're just kind of screwed, but God is revealing itself to them maybe in a different way that wouldn't count, but still a different way. And so that's why we have different religions. Well, why didn't God just tell them what the dang religion was to follow? And God's hiddenness is identical to its non existence because it is so well hidden that you cannot pick which religion is true as an outsider looking in. They all look identical. But if you're a believer, you must assert that your religion is the right one, is the true one, with a capital T sometimes, and that everything confirms it, even when it doesn't. But that's the hallmark of a true apologist, is to just ignore the facts and argue for things that aren't true. And then to create straw man like all atheists are scared of this, or you can't answer these questions, or what have you. Oh, sure, I could come up with all sorts of questions. And I'm sorry, but The Lobster is far more compelling as a book than the Bible is. It's got stuff in there that's absolutely true. Some weird stuff as well, granted, but things that you just can't ignore. But somebody wrote that. A human wrote that, right? Wow. A human edited it, but maybe they were inspired by the great lobster deity. And it could write all sorts of things that happened before in the book that then are fulfilled later in the book. See, I've got prophecies fulfilled. And you say, well, but they were really written a long time ago. Yeah, and if I know about them, then I could say that they're fulfilled. But there you go. It's not. So give me something better. Finally, the prophecies beyond being vague or possibly self fulfilling or written in later. Um, and also not being able to know what is or isn't a prophecy, and all the other problems that come with that. It goes against the whole, free will thing. That's another problem in there. It's like God is giving you kind of some clues, like, look, see, I'll predict the future because only God can do that due to reasons. And then, that will prove to you I'm God, but I won't give you the sort of proof that you want because other reasons. So the proof that atheists and skeptics, broadly speaking, want of empirical evidence just be visible is not there because I can't give you that because I already gave you enough evidence. No, you didn't. Well, I mean, look, you had all this, and even if you had all that, you still wouldn't believe. I don't know. Give me all that. Give me Jesus to test today. No? Okay. Well, why should I believe in it? Well, because it says it in this book that you can't rely upon. That's why. What about all these other books? Don't worry about those. Look at this. It's so ridiculous, the hide and seek game that you would have to believe in to think that these prophecies lead up to this thing. The actual Messiah that the Jews are waiting on is going to make the whole world perfect. Now, maybe somebody somewhere at some point will do that. But unless they do all the things that the Jewish people are expecting, they're not the Messiah. But you could very well call somebody that was able to bring peace to the world a Messiah. But maybe humanity itself and no one single person will be able to unify all of us together. I think that if we had something like, let's explore the universe as a goal of humanity that we could all, that everyone decided for whatever reason to get behind, that could unify us. But whether or not we'll actually do that, who knows? And I think the longer that we mire ourselves in the superstitions of the past, the longer it's going to take for us to move forward as a society. Look at all the anti science stuff that many are responsible for. We just had the conversation with a guy that thinks the Earth is 6,000 years young and the universe is 6,000 years young. Why? Because of faith. Not fact, just faith, which at least he admits to. And then he goes, oh, but you can't explain abiogenesis without a mind. I'm like, so? To you, that's true, but to me, it's not. Well, you have to believe this. I don't have to believe anything. I don't know. And that's where that inquiry ends. It's just, I don't know. Let's figure it out. Well, but you're stuck in this materialistic thing, and and there's more ad hoc of why we don't believe. It's just ridiculous. All right. What else can I complain about? I mean, I don't know. Let's see if there's anything in chat. Oopsie. No. Hi. Okay. Nothing. One person in chat. Well, that's great. That's fine. It happens. As typical with SJ, her video titles are very clickbait ish. Well, I understand that. But these things don't frighten atheists. Nothing in the Bible does. Well, I mean, if you're gonna really try to say, well, this should be something frightening, I guess there's some passages about dashing infants' heads against rocks. That's pretty frightening. Ask some Jewish people if the temple was rebuilt, if they would want animal sacrifices to be a thing again. That could be pretty frightening if it came back. But, other than that, it's kind of frightening that some Christians believe that Jesus will talk to them or that God will talk to them. And many women have killed their kids because they thought that was sending them to heaven. And, well, it is, at least if Pascal's baby is correct. And if you haven't seen that video I did, go check out Pascal's baby wager thing that I made. These prophecies aren't frightening. Nothing about the Bible is frightening. I used to read Revelation a whole lot and think that was about the end of the world until I learned that it's about King Nero. And all the things that I was trying to figure out what it meant didn't mean anything at all. It's just pattern seeking. And a number of people have thought that the world will end almost every single year. And eventually, at some point, they'll be right, but because the sun will, explode. But I think people will die off long before that, unless, again, we get out off of this rock that we call Earth and get to some other planets and get beyond the solar system. For humanity to survive, we have to spread out. Whether that will happen or not, I don't know. But prophecies haven't been fulfilled. They've just been contrived to look that way at best. This is circular reasoning, and that doesn't scare me. That's all I got for you. Unless until we have a logically coherent argument, which we don't here, we should be skeptical of the conclusions.